Greetings, traveler. It's good to see you again. You care to hear some more of the story? We thought the worst was behind us. We pushed through the dark to a set of grand, heavy dwarven doors. Behind them was the black spider himself, Neznar. And he held Nundro, the dwarf we'd been tearing the entire cabin apart to find, at the edge of his blade. Now Neznar was cold as stone. When he realized we had absolutely nothing of value to bargain with, he casually ordered Nundro's execution. Well, naturally, I saw my moment. I pulled the magic of the weave around me and folded space, intending to blink across the room, grab Nundro's hand, and make a breathtaking heroic exit. Well, it turns out breathless heroism is difficult when the dwarf you're rescuing melts his own face off and punches you in the jaw. He was a shapeshifter. Knocked the dignity and nearly my head right out of me. From there, any pretense of strategy went completely out the window. The black spider summoned a swarm of giant spiders from the ceiling, but we were frankly too annoyed to care. Cork roared a divine battle cry that shook the dust from the rafters, while Ellie decided she had absolutely enough of the black spider's arrogance. She simply raised her holy symbol and commanded the sun itself to fill the room. A flash of blinding, purifying divine wrath caught Neznar dead center, searing him to ash before he could even finish his villainous sneer. Very efficient. How Ellie. Booge backed himself into a corner, calmly chopping through giant spiders like he was clearing brush, and the shapeshifter realized he was abruptly on the losing side. The creature bolted, and what followed is a moment I will treasure until the end of my days. Cork sprinted after him, fueled by pure, unadulterated orcish stubbornness, his heavy boots shaking the very stone. A heartbeat later, the air rippled around Saban. She let the primal wilds take her, shedding her slow, methodical total nature in an instant. In a blur of magic, she shifted, not into a usual hulking bear, but into a magnificent thundering riding horse. I still don't fully understand where a massive shell goes during that particular anatomical transition, and frankly, I'm too terrified to ask. But there she was, hooves striking sparks against the cabin floor. As she charged past, she didn't even slow down. She simply dipped her massive head, caught me by the collar of my robes in her teeth, and flipped me onto her back in one fluid, terrifying motion. I landed mid-gallop like a very surprised sack of flour. It was glorious, ridiculous cavalry charge right there in the dark. We thundered past the rest of the battle, the wind whipping my beard into an absolute frenzy, and caught up to the shifter just as he threw himself into an underground river. We fished him out of the rapids before he even knew what hit him. We got our answers, found the real Nundro hidden elsewhere, and any sane group would have stopped to sleep. But we pushed south. We stepped into an old smelting room, and I nearly jumped clean out of my robes. Floating right there in the middle of the dark, green flames burning as bright as ever, was Kevin. The very same skull we had watched Ellie and Saban pound into literal bone dust just hours prior. Alive. Well, undead. But you take my meaning. It took us a solid second to process the sheer audacity of his continued existence. He immediately started shrieking about our imminent demise again. Of course, the shock wore off rather quickly. We didn't even give him the courtesy of a proper fight this time. And Cork just snatched him out of the air. I conjured a magical hand to clamp his bony jaws shut, and we strolled right past while he sulked. You know, I'm fairly certain we caused severe emotional damage. It was funny for a fleeting moment, until we reached the grand dining hall. Bones scattered everywhere. Now normally would blunder right in, but for once my eyes were sharp. I glanced up into the shadows of the steep stone embankments above us. Ghouls. 8 of them. Clinging to the rock like starving wolves. Just wanting to drop. We actually had the element of surprise. I threw up my hands and unleashed a roaring sheet of flame right into the roofs before they even know we saw him. But the advantage was terribly short-lived. They descended in a frenzy, Saban and Ellie tried to hold a defensive line, but the sheer weight of the dead broke them. One of the starving creatures lunged right through the fading embers of my fire. Its claws tore right across me, leaving freezing rot in their wake. I felt myself dying. The world was being erased. I only survived because Boosh, bless that terrifyingly optimistic man, forced a healing drought right down my throat while the battle was raging around us. But just as I woke up gasping, Ellie fell, swarmed by the dead, slipping away. Now if there's one universal truth about our adventuring party, it's this. We do not touch the cleric while Cork has breath in his lungs. The orc let out a bellowing of pure, unadulterated rage that rattled my teeth in my skull. He threw himself straight into the swarm, his great axe completely obliterating the ghoul that dragged her down. He planted his massive boots on either side of the fallen form, become an absolute wall of roaring muscle and steel, daring the rest of the undead tide to try and move him. And that protective frenzy brought us the precious seconds we needed. Boosh, seeing the opening, dives behind Cork's barricade and reaches into his pack. Now mind you, a few days prior we had slain a really nasty acidic monster, the ochre slime. Boosh, in a stroke of either culinary genius or absolute madness, and scraped up its acidic slime and slowly cooked it over a campfire into a sugary confection. And right then, behind the shield of the raging orc, he becomes a terrifying display of combat triage by desperately shoving this experimental, gelatinous candy into the dying cleric's mouth. And it worked. Never underestimate the restorative power of a fighter's questionable cooking. Between Cork's relentless axe and Boug's frantic swings, they shattered the last of the ghouls. We dragged ourselves back to safety to finally barricade the doors and rest. I will admit, my legs had entirely given up by that point. So I rode the entire way back, clinging to Saban's turtle shell, like a very exhausted barnacle. Because that cave, well, it certainly keeps you humble. Well, my friend, this old gnome is feeling kinda weary. I think it's time to turn in. We're almost near the end of the story. If you want to hear the rest, you know where to find me. Good night.